We got our coffee now. We're all ready to go for the second half here. All right, so my name's Anthony Giandomenico. People call me Tony G. I'm a senior security strategist / researcher working in the FortiGuard labs. And today I'm going to be talking to you all about our FortiGuard labs and some of our cyber threat intelligence. Now, specifically, I want to talk about really quickly just an overview of FortiGuard, so we'll go through that fairly quick. And then I want to talk about our threat information sharing program and some of the things that we're doing behind the scenes within FortiGuard labs. And then we'll talk about some of the threat predictions that we predicted for 2017 and see where we are today with some of them. And then lastly, I got some telemetry data. So we have about 3 million sensors out there that are collecting information worldwide. And what I want to be able to do is talk about some of the top threats that are specific to this region. And then we'll kind of close it out with the cybersecurity fabric. So before I get started, a little about me. I've been in the business now for about 20 plus years. Most of my experience is around security consulting. I did a lot of CISO services, security assessments, penetration testing. I built a few security operations centers and managed security service services. I also had the fortunate opportunity of spending many of those years out in Honolulu, Hawaii, where I founded a security conference called ShakaCon. So if you folks are ever interested in going to learn a little bit about security at the Hawaiian Islands, ShakaCon may be the conference for you. And lastly, today, I'm a threat researcher, so I'm doing a lot of understanding the tactics, techniques, and procedures of the adversaries, and also being able to respond to those threat outbreaks as they happen. So that's a little bit about me. Now let's talk about FortiGuard here. But right before we do that, I wanted to mention targeted threats. Targeted threats, super important. These targeted attacks, these are the ones that make the newspaper, and they're things that you have to worry about. However, I think what's even more serious that you need to start thinking about is the volume of threat data that we're seeing these days. You look at some of the numbers here. The one I want to point out here, 1.2 million intrusion attempts we're thwarting every minute for our customers. That's a very astronomical number. And the reason why that number is so high, it's because of the cybercrime ecosystem. That's what's driving this volume. Nowadays, you don't have to know anything about security to get into a life of cybercrime. All you need to know is where to access some of these services, and you need to understand, and you're going to need a little bit of money. Actually, as we get through this presentation, I'll show you some things where you don't even need any money to get into a life of cybercrime. What you have here, you have these crime producers, these folks that are building the malware. They have relationships with the organized criminals and also have some relationships with these affiliate programs. These affiliate programs then will advertise a lot of these crime enabler services that'll host these different types of portals that you can log into, and it's an easy, point and click, and you're compromising different systems. They also have the capability to make sure that you have some crypto services that can pack the malware or obfuscate the malware to circumvent some of the AV defenses that are currently out there today. So very sophisticated. The other thing I wanted to mention, and this is going to be a theme throughout the entire presentation here, these tools that are available in the cybercrime ecosystem, they're automated. So we need to make sure that we're fighting automation with automation. So if the bad guys are using automation, our defensive systems have to be automated for us as well. And I'll talk a little bit more about that through the presentation. Now, FortiGuard Labs, we've been around for the last 17 years, and our real focus is being able to provide threat intelligence and research and deliver that information down to our products, as well as being able to share that with a lot of our other sharing partners, right? We want to be able to get that information out to a lot of the different organizations that we all already share information with, and I'll talk more about that also throughout the presentation. We do have about 200 analysts that are focused on solving a variety of different threat problems. And that number may sound pretty impressive, but I think the secret sauce for us really is this ingestion system that we've built over the years that can consume these large volumes of data and determine automatically if something is malicious or if it's benign and slap a digital signature on it. And we do that through big data analytics, through machine learning, artificial intelligence. We're letting the machines make these decisions for us, because there's no way with that volume of data coming in that those 200 analysts are going to be able to handle that information. So that's a little bit about FortiGuard here. Now, some of the other things that's unique to FortiGuard is everything we do is all under one roof. So we're not outsourcing anything. We're not outsourcing AV or web filtering like some of the other competitors are. And I think that gives us a bit of a competitive advantage, because each particular individual in those particular groups are solving a specific threat problem. And they're going to learn about other aspects of that threat that the other groups are going to want to know. So we automatically share that information amongst each other. That gives us a much greater view of that cyber kill chain. And I think that allows us to respond to threats a lot quicker. Now, everything is all under one roof. However, we do have over 200 information sharing threat partners or programs that we're currently involved in. And as we bring in some of that threat data from those partnerships, we pre-process it, we deduplicate it, and we validate it to make sure that it's 100% accurate before we deliver it down into our particular products. We also have 3 million sensors out there that are bringing in a variety of telemetry data. And this is what allows us to identify these different types of outbreaks and allows us to focus on where are the actual threats. Are they in a specific region? Are they in a specific industry? We also have this program called CTAP. CTAP allows us, every quarter, we're probably monitoring about 1,000 different networks in real time and collecting that telemetry data as well. So we combine all this telemetry data, and we end up, if you guys haven't heard of this before, we provide a quarterly threat landscape report. If you haven't actually seen it, head over to the website, and you can download it, and it has a lot of good statistics. What we're trying to do is see if we can find different types of trends that will help you folks identify where you should be focusing your security efforts moving forward. So it's a pretty interesting report. Happens once a quarter. Right now, we're working on Q3. We're almost finished. It'll be out sometime in November. So that's a little bit about FortiGuard. There's a lot more I can talk about with FortiGuard, but I wanted to make it, fairly short. What I want to dive into a little bit now is our information sharing program. It's important to talk about this because there's no one entity that's going to be able to see everything out there on the internet. Information sharing obviously is very important to us as it is to a lot of other folks. It's only going to, at the end of the day, benefit you folks, the customers. So like I mentioned, we do have over 200 threat information sharing partners that we have today. And that consists of government agencies, certs from around the world, as well as strategic partners. Our latest one that we brought on board was the New Zealand cert. Now, all of these programs or these partnerships all fall into 3 different categories or 3 different tiers that we currently have. Our first tier is tier 3. This is our lowest level tier, and this is what I refer to as our unidirectional tier. And this is where either we're sharing a threat feed with the customer or they're sharing a threat feed with us. And it's typically basic. IOCs, bad IPs, bad domains, bad URLs, maybe some hashes, very little contextual information, but we do have a lot of partners at this level. Now, as we move up the pyramid here in tier 2, now we do a lot more bidirectional communication, and we have a lot more contextual information at this particular tier. And this is usually when we share this information, it's usually through a threat information sharing platform, like maybe MISP. Some of you folks may have actually heard of that. It's the malware information sharing platform. Or it may be something that's more custom, the Cyber Threat Alliance that we're part of. We're one of the founders of that. It's a very customized portal. We have to make sure our information fits into that portal. Now, the information that we share here is both technical and non-technical, but typically what it is we're identifying different types of attack campaigns and analyzing those campaigns, grabbing all the different types of malware tools that are being used, and we analyze that. We extract all those observables, and we put them into the sharing platform, and sometimes we might actually produce a report and share that with folks as well. Now, the number 1 tier here at the tip of the pyramid is our collaboration tier. Now, this is the tier where we're actually doing some joint investigations, and our analysts oftentimes are working hand in hand with the other analyst. We may even be sort of face to face, and we're working very closely together, and sometimes we're able to tie attribution and bring a particular threat actor to justice. So some of the more notable ones, partnerships that we have today, we do have a nice partnership with NATO, as well as right here with KISA. And we also have a relationship with Interpol. Interpol happens to be one of our collaboration partners. That's at our highest tier. And we recently worked with them. You may have heard this. Last year, we worked with them, and we were tracking a threat actor that was responsible for about $60 million of stealing from victims worldwide. Now, with our information, their information, as well as others, we combined our cyber threat intelligence, and we were able to map out this particular kingpin's infrastructure that all pointed back to him, and we were able to bring this particular threat actor to justice. So this is some things that we can actually do at that collaboration tier, which is actually pretty cool. So what I thought I'd do also right now is kind of share with you our analysis and response process that we go through at a very high level that ends up resulting in the threat intelligence that we end up sharing with our partners. So the first process is the first step. We got to have a starting point. We got to know where to start. And what happens is we bring all that telemetry data into our environment. A lot of that gets baselined. And as it's baseline, we have these deviation algorithms that'll be able to see when there's deviations in the threats that are coming in. That's an indication for us that we need to figure out what's going on, because that might be an attack campaign. So that's one way to do it. We also have very smart researchers that have been doing this for many years. So they may have a hypothesis, a hunch, or an idea of maybe a particular malware or a particular threat actor, some of the actual techniques that they use. So we can use that as a starting point to mine our data. And of course, news, blogs, searching the dark net, we have the ability to do those things. And oftentimes we do that as well. Most of the times, those end up being threat outbreaks that had just made the news, and we need to follow up and see how our customers are actually doing with that. But once we have that starting point, we then go through our cross-scanning step. Before we start analyzing, we want to actually cross-scan this across all of our partners. And this is actually pretty cool, because now we can understand what our partners know about it before we start doing our analysis. Once we understand what the partners have, now we go through our own analysis. And we'll do some reverse engineering, some manual stuff, because we want to extract all of those observables, all those IOCs, network IOCs and system IOCs, and understand what the malware, what the actual tool is supposed to do. And of course, we'll run it through our sandbox technology. We also have what we refer to as a playground. In our research center, we have a playground where we're developing new technology through machine learning, artificial intelligence, that's able to detect new threats that are out there. But it's not mature enough yet for us to actually kind of put it into our product. So it's our playground that sometimes we'll run these particular threats through there and see what else we can glean. And of course, we want to be able to identify, where is this threat at? Is it a specific region or industry, or is it something that's happening globally? So we do that, and once we analyze that, we want to find out how it's being delivered. Most of the time, the delivery of choice is what? It's a phishing email, right? So we have a lot of phishing email examples that are associated with that binary that we're looking at. So we'll analyze that, but we also can see if it's coming from maybe some website that was compromised, some drive-by, and also malvertising. So there's many different ways that threat can be delivered. We like to identify that. And then step number 5 here, let's rip out all the observables, right? Because all this stuff is going to end up going into a package. So for example, when we rip out these observables, we want to find out a little bit more about them. Maybe they're network observables, IP addresses, domains, URLs. We'll run them through some of our other systems to see if maybe it's part of a command and control infrastructure. Maybe it's part of a certain actor that we be tracking, or maybe it's just part of an actual kind of website that's been compromised. Whatever the case may be, we want to find that information out. And as we go through those steps, eventually, there's multiple work products that we produce. They actually can be sticks packages that we'll put together, as well as maybe just plain old CVS format. It might be an Excel format, that's really the way the customer wants it. Or we'll give more detailed reports. Now, speaking of detailed reports, this is something that we just kind of put together recently. This is just an example. We call it our FortiGuard Hot Bulletin / report. And what you'll get here oftentimes is a little overview of the threat, right? Then we'll talk about the severity of the spread. How many sensors are triggering on that threat? And then we'll dive into an understanding what the threat actor actually is, what the actual group is. Is it nation state? Is it cybercrime? Or is it hacktivism? Or whatever the case may be. And then where is it actually kind of targeting within, what different countries, right? Who are the top 3 countries, top 3 industries, as well as an activity timeline here, just to see how long it's been active and how it's been active going up and down. And then we also have this matrix here, understanding the actual attack tactics, techniques, and procedures, and the defensive measures against those TTPs. We have a lot of extra commentary as well if we need to explain it a little bit more. And of course, we have our IOCs, our observables that we'll document. And then we'll have a now more detailed analysis of the different types of tools that might be used within that campaign. So that's just an example of one of the reports that end up going out there. Now, we have this information, right? Now, how do we distribute it out to all of the different outlets? And there are quite a few outlets. Right? So now we have this. One outlet is comms and marketing, right? So you guys go to our blog sites, right? All that information is coming from our threat information sharing platform, right? We have to be able to get it out. So oftentimes, we'll work with communications, with marketing. You'll get something like through blogs. You might even get an educational presentation where we included that information in there. Or sometimes, it might end up in our quarterly threat report. We also internal security is one of our partners, right? We have our own security operations center. We have to be able to protect our own assets. So there's threat intelligence that might be pertinent for them, and we deliver that down to internal security so then they can start hunting for the adversary within their own environment. And of course, we have a lot more additional contextual information we share with partners like the Cyber Threat Alliance, right? There's a lot of different vendors that are involved in that. With KISA, with NATO, New Zealand CERT, all of those threat information sharing partners. And then also here, analysis as a service. Some of you may have heard of our threat intelligence service. It's still in beta right now. If you're interested, you can go to the website and automatically sign up, and you can get a beta version of it, and you can test it out. It's still not as mature yet as we'd like it, but it will actually show you some telemetry data, what some of the top threats are, and also threats that are happening in your organization as well. So at least you get some trending aspects of the threats. What we'd like to do, and this is going to happen as the product matures a bit more, some of that information and that type of reporting I just showed you, that will be consumed into this threat intelligence service, or we call it TIS. So that's our threat information sharing program. Now let's move to talking about some of these particular predictions and where we stand today. What have we seen thus far? So what I'm trying to say here is that malware is getting more sophisticated. Automated and human-like malware really demands more intelligent defenses. And here I go back to the same theme, automation versus automation. Typically, malware is very binary in the past. It's there to complete one thing. It might look for one vulnerability to exploit and does that one thing. Moving forward, we're starting to see the malware get a lot more intelligent. Once they're in the network, right, they're going to be aware of their surroundings. The actual threat will be able to scan the network, understand all the vulnerabilities that exist on that network, and then bring down exploits to exploit those particular vulnerabilities and move forward. It's not so much focused on exploiting a vulnerability as it is completing that cyber mission. Whatever that cyber mission may be and whatever it needs to do, usually as you start to move laterally within the network, there's a human behind the threat, right? So once you're in, there's command and control back, and then you're kind of moving forward. There's a human there. Times go on, we're seeing the actual technology and the malware not need the human anymore. You just kind of program it in there, and it starts to move laterally amongst itself, right? that's going to be very difficult for us to be able to detect and contain in a short amount of time. Little example here. You guys all remember DEF CON, right? It's a big security conference that happens every year in Las Vegas. Every year, also, they have a capture the flag. And usually there's a bunch of human teams that get together and battle each other. They try to hack each other. While they're hacking each other at the same time, they have to protect their assets, right, from the other folks hacking them. DARPA put something together to be able to say, hey, look, I want to be able to see if the machines can do capture the flag. Let the machines themselves hack into other machines and defend themselves against those other machines. So in 2016, they did exactly that. They let these prototypes, there were 7 prototypes that battled it out. A very successful CTF, capture the flag. One particular prototype came out victorious. That prototype went up against the human team. Luckily, the human team won, but I guarantee, give it a few years, and that's going to change, right? Because those machines are going to start doing, making those automated, decisions, not only from a defense perspective, but from an offensive perspective as well. So another prediction here, IoT. Internet of Things. We all know that there's going to be a lot of devices out there. I have here 20 billion IoT devices. And we also know these IoT devices are not as secure as they need to be. Most of the vendors focus on functionality and not necessarily security. So there's going to be 20 billion of these things out there. It's going to be, and already is, the weakest link. And the weakest link is going to be that attack vector, that initial attack vector into cloud infrastructures. It might be that initial attack vector into your organization, if you have IoT. It also might be the initial attack vector into your homes. You might have IoT already in your homes as these homes become smarter and smarter. We need to figure out a way to protect some of this stuff. Now, you might think, well, is it happening already? Absolutely. IoT devices are being exploited all the time. They're being targeted more and more from, researchers in the community as well as a lot of the bad guys. And you can see here, this is a listing from our FortiGuard labs of how many IoT exploits we're actually seeing. The routers are being targeted the most. I mean, those are some of the home routers. You do have DVRs, NAS systems, some printers, IP cameras, and telephony devices. They're all being targeted. Now, here's an example here. Hajime botnet? Hajime botnet. Okay. I was working on that for a while. I just couldn't get it. So this is an example of a very sophisticated botnet through IoT devices. It's a multiple platform, right? It has worm-like capabilities and decentralized command and control. Basically what it does, it goes out there and scans for port 23, and then it does a brute force attack on these IoT devices. Once the IoT device is compromised, then that IoT device is sent down some more code. Now that IoT device starts scanning for other IoT devices and keeps compromising and compromising. The really interesting thing about this, though, the command and control infrastructure is all via P2P, right? So there is no one, command and control infrastructure that everyone goes back to. It's a mesh network. When you have a mesh network, it's much harder to bring down. So really something to think about. Now, this IoT threat here, it affects 9 different platforms. Here we're starting to see the malware become more intelligent. 9 different platforms, including x86. We first seen this last year in October, and we had about 30,000 detections we're seeing per day. Now, the interesting thing about this particular malware is that it's not doing anything malicious, at least not yet. A lot of researchers think, you might have heard of a botnet referred to as the Mirai botnet, where that was actually a botnet that actually ended up using its network for distributed denial of service attacks. Well, oftentimes some researchers say that this is the actual good botnet and the Mirai is the bad botnet, and they're competing for overtaking the IoT devices, right? So this thing isn't kind of doing anything, and if it compromises that IoT device that was initially an IoT device of the Mirai botnet, it's not going to be doing anything, right? So they're going back and forth. So it's the good versus the evil. And I'm not exactly sure what the next steps are for this particular malware, but probably stay tuned. We'll probably see something earlier on next year. But just think about this. Strength is in the numbers. These IoT devices, there's so many of them that what the bad guys can do is really limitless. And this last prediction here, I think we all know this. There's a big skills shortage. It's why we all have jobs, right? Job security for many years. And we're not going to be able to catch up to that shortage of jobs for many years. And this is why we need to have technology help us fill that gap until we're able to catch up. And I'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end of the presentation. Now, along with this is this thing called ransomworms. It's something we coined earlier on this year. And what ransomworms is, it's taking the destructive ransom-like payload and combining it with fast-spreading worm-like capabilities. Examples of this would typically be your WannaCry and your NotPetya, right? Because most of the time, ransomware is delivered through an email. Well, now it's starting to be delivered through worm. It's affecting multiple vulnerabilities, finding vulnerabilities out there that haven't been patched, exploiting them, and then spreading through that vulnerability. Now, I think we're going to start to see more and more of them. WannaCry and NotPetya are just the beginning of this. Actually, I think there was another one this morning. Bad Rabbit, I think, hit us as well. Not necessarily in this area, but it did actually hit out there. Now, this particular vulnerability wasn't nothing special about it. I mean, this particular threat, nothing special about it, except that the way it spread was through vulnerabilities. If you were practicing good cyber hygiene and you patched all your systems, you weren't affected by this at all. And I'll say that these vulnerabilities that it spread off of, there was a patch out there for a few months. So something to think about when it comes to cyber hygiene. Actually, I got these slides wrong here. This was the skills shortage slide. What I was talking about before was ransomware. And what I was supposed to talk about a few slides before was the ransomware one. So real quick on the ransomware, what we're going to start to see, because the economies of scale, more and more victims are going to be able to get infected, and what we're going to see is a smaller ransom, right? So instead of paying $500 to be able to have your files free or your device available again, it may be $50, it may be $25. It's going to be much lower because the volume is going to be so much higher. And remember this, those IoT devices in your home, you can probably, at some point in time, as time goes on, you can probably plan on your IoT device somehow being held for ransom. And maybe you're going to have to pay a few dollars or maybe a few Bitcoin to get that stuff back. I wonder if they're using blockchain. I'm not really sure. So telemetry data. Let's talk about the threats that are focusing in this particular region right here. And just so you know, this is coming from our 3 million sensors that we have deployed around the world. And this is the number of sensors that are triggering these particular threats. Now here's the top 5 malware here. This number 1 here is the malicious underscore behavior signature. Now, this signature is kind of interesting because this threat, this signature indicates that we didn't have an actual signature for this. We didn't know this malware. What had happened was we ran it through our sandbox technology, and our sandbox technology discovered that there was some malicious behavior and said, hey, this thing's bad. So it's probably safe to say that a lot of the malware that's targeting this region is unknown. So possibly having some sandbox technology might be something that kind of makes sense for some of you folks. The rest of these, the top 4 outside of number 1, VBS agent. This is basically a Visual Basic dropper. Oftentimes, it's contained in, maybe you get an email, and the email maybe has a Word document attachment. that has a malicious macro, and it's going to launch this particular VB script. Now, as this thing gets on your machine, it's going to download a particular payload. These particular variants of these downloaders are downloading ransomware. So the top four, or 4 out of the top 5, are droppers that are downloading ransomware. So speaking of ransomware here, CryptoWall seems to be the highest ransomware that we have in this region today, which is kind of interesting because I think we kind of stopped this particular ransomware a couple years ago, but it's still alive and well, especially in this region. Now, I don't want to go through each one of these, but I do want to note that you might be asking, why is there so much of it? It's because it's been introduced in a cybercrime ecosystem, and these are ransomwares as a service. At a high level, this host ransomware is very customizable. You can do anything really that you want. You can look at what type of Bitcoin address you want to use, what the actual ransom price is going to be, what files you want to be able to target, and it's really not that much. You can have unlimited use for about $50. The Flux ransomware is another one. And then the one I really wanted to hit on here is the ransomware affiliate network. Remember I said you might not even need to have any money to get into a life of cybercrime? Welcome to the profit sharing model. You have the ability here to share the profits. You get to keep 75% of every ransom that you get. You just need to give 25% to the adversary, to the malware author. And of course, they're always looking for the more infections for them, the better. So there's accelerators. If you can hit 100,000 in a month, you get to keep more of that money. Okay, interesting. At the same time here, ransomware is starting to mature more, which they're giving you a lot more options. I find this hilarious. They have an immunity option, which means if you pay $50, they promise not to hack you again. Not to say that some other adversary won't be hacking you again. And they also, just to make sure that you understand that they can decrypt your files, they'll actually decrypt 2 files for free at no additional charge, just to prove that they can decrypt those files. Top botnets here. So Ghost Rat is a particular botnet that's usually associated with a payload that infects a Windows machine and has the capability of stealing data as well as remote controlling that particular machine. That's very common. We see that in a lot of East Asian countries. CryptoWall, that makes sense, right? Because you do have a lot of sort of ransomware that's being targeted specifically. It's that CryptoWall ransomware. But I thought this one here was interesting, FinFisher. If you hadn't heard of this before, it's associated with FinSpy, which is actually a commercial surveillance tool that you can buy. It's on the website. You go type in FinFisher, and you'll see the website. It's a surveillance tool for IT investigations. Lots of organizations have purchased this, as well as many governments out there today. And our particular systems have triggered on that sometime this year within this region. Top 5 intrusion prevention events, which means exploit events. The top 3 out of the top 5 all were focused on IoT devices. Well, how about that? The first one was focused. There was an injection with a Wi-Fi camera. We had another command injection with a DVR. And then the last one up there, D-Link devices, those home routers. So they are definitely targeting these IoT devices, specifically within this region. And this might actually be familiar to some of you folks who actually read about the Equifax breach. That was the vulnerability of Apache struts that allowed the adversaries to penetrate into Equifax. Now, I don't know if this is just researchers scanning the globe to identify what other systems may be vulnerable, or it is the different types of attackers trying to attack that exploit. Top 5 exploit kits. This kind of makes sense. Rig and Angler, these are global. We see these everywhere across the globe. So it's no surprise that I don't see these here as the top 5. Also keep in mind, these exploit kits have been known to be drop ransomware payload as well. And then lastly here, the top 5 OpenSSL attacks. Now, you see here, all 5 of them are related to that Heartbleed vulnerability that I think was identified back in 2014. You would think that most folks probably already patched these particular systems, but they seem to, the attackers still seem to be going after them, specifically within this region. Now, let me close out here this presentation. I talked to you about fighting automation with automation. You really need to start kind of doing that. You need to have the same weapons that the adversary does. You wouldn't bring a knife to a gunfight, right? You want to bring that same weapon. So to be able to do that, to fight automation with automation and be able to deal with that threat volume that we're seeing out there today, is we need to leverage artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning. We need to let the machines start to help make decisions for us on what's malicious and what's not. And we're doing that right now in our FortiGuard labs. And we're getting actionable threat intelligence from that labs. We call this our expert system because what happens is we deliver all this information down into our Fortinet products, or I refer to as our technology controls. And when we do that, these controls, if they can start to talk to each other, when they're seeing different types of threats, and they can automatically respond and be able to at least contain that breach without you even knowing about it, that's what you're looking for. What you don't want is another alert that hits your SIM and it says, hey, we've detected XYZ. Okay, great. What did you do about it? Well, they're making you want to go do something about it. What you want is an alert that triggers and says, hey, we detected this. Our sandbox found out that it was vulnerable or that it was something that was malicious. It had some malicious behavior. And you know what? We identified where it was happening throughout your entire network, and we contained the breach. Just letting you know, we detected it, we contained the breach, nothing to worry about, but you probably want to probably go ahead and clean that up somehow. That's the alert that you want. You want the alert saying the machine actually did something for you that then you can go in and figure out what's really going on. Let the machines start to make automated decisions for you. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to compete, and you're going to continue to lose this cybersecurity battle. Now, with that said, that concludes my presentation. So thank you.